In the heart of the world's richest empire, there was this hidden city, a whole world living in the shadows. We're talking about Victorian London, a place of incredible contrasts, where unimaginable wealth existed right next to a kind of poverty so extreme it actually had its own name. This is the story of the people who were completely forgotten. Take a look at this photograph. It was taken around 1877, and it is absolutely haunting. This isn't some portrait of a queen or a general. It's a super rare glimpse into a world that was basically designed to be invisible. This woman, her face telling a story of incredible hardship, was known as a crawler. And her story, well, it tells us everything about what it meant to survive at the absolute bottom of the wealthiest city on Earth. The name itself is just chilling, isn't it? A crawler. These were the people on the lowest possible rung of society. Often they were elderly, sick, or disabled. They were so physically weakened by constant hunger and illness that they could barely even move, let alone work or beg effectively. They were like the ghosts of the industrial age, just clinging to life on London's merciless streets. So let's dive into her story, which all starts with this one single photograph. It was captured by a journalist named John Thompson, and it really opens a window into a life of unbelievable desperation, but also resilience. Now, where this photo was taken is so important. These are the steps of the St. Giles Parish Workhouse. This was the place you went when you had absolutely nothing left. It was the last resort. For this woman, these very steps became her workplace. She was minding a baby for another woman who was working inside. And what did she get for this incredibly important job of watching a child? A single cup of tea and one slice of bread. That's it. Think about that. That tiny meal was all that stood between her and actual starvation. It tells you everything you need to know about the brutal value placed on a human life in the city's darkest corners.
So you might be asking, well, why not just go inside the workhouse? For so many people, that really wasn't a choice. It felt more like a surrender. The conditions inside were deliberately made to be awful, to discourage anyone but the most desperate from seeking help. As this comment says, it was like living in a prison. She was actively choosing the brutal hardship of the street over the sheer misery of the workhouse. Okay, so this woman's story is just one of hundreds of thousands. To really get a sense of her life, we have to zoom out and look at the environment that created people like the crawlers in the first place, the infamous London slums. This right here, this was the Nickel, a notorious slum in London's East End. A social investigator at the time, Charles Booth, called it a district of solid poverty and low life. You had streets crammed with falling apart houses, overflowing with people, and diseases like cholera were just rampant. This was the daily reality for so many. And the cost of living here was literally measured in lives. In the area that included the Nickel, the annual mortality rate was 40.4 deaths for every 1,000 people. To put that in perspective, that was nearly double the rate for the rest of the district. You were simply far less likely to survive if you lived here. These conditions were so shocking, so extreme, that they started to attract outsiders. We're talking about journalists, artists, and photographers who actually ventured into these dangerous slums to document what they saw and to expose this hidden world to a public that was, frankly, horrified. And they went about it in very different ways. On one hand, you had John Thompson, the same photographer who took that picture of our crawler. He used the brand new technology of photography to capture real life with this amazing sense of authenticity. But on the other hand, you had artists like Gustave Doré, whose engravings were super dramatic, dark, almost theatrical. He really emphasized the Gothic horror of it all. Here's another one of Thompson's photographs called London Nomads. See, he doesn't just show you poverty. He captures individuals, families, a sense of humanity that somehow survives within all that squalor. His work really forces you to see them as people, not just statistics. Now, all this documentation didn't just stay in reports and art galleries. Oh no, it bled into popular culture, and it provided the raw material for a whole new genre of fiction that was about to take London by storm. Remember what Charles Booth said about the Nichols slum? The place deserved destruction. It's such a brutal final judgment on a whole neighborhood. And it was exactly this feeling, this sense that a place could be beyond all hope, that an author named Arthur Morrison decided to really dig into. So in 1896, Morrison publishes his novel A Child of the Jago. It's a fictional story about life in the Nickel, But unlike the sentimental stories people were used to, Morrison's novel was raw. It was violent, and it refused to give any easy answers. It shocked readers because it didn't portray the poor as noble victims waiting to be saved. Instead, it showed the slum as a brutal, self-contained world with its own rules and its own unforgiving logic. So, with all this new attention from photographers, from novelists, what actually happened to places like the Nickel? And how do we even remember them today?
Well, the official solution was often just as brutal as the problem itself: complete and total destruction. Huge slum clearance projects, like the one that demolished the Nickel, literally tore entire neighborhoods down, wiping them off the map, all in the name of progress and public health. But here's the thing. Arthur Morrison argued that you can't just demolish poverty. He wrote that when you tear down the slum, the residents are transubstantiated from bricks and mortar into flesh and blood. Basically, destroying the buildings didn't solve the problem. It just scattered the people, pushing poverty into new corners of the city.
This is such a fascinating contrast here. On the left, you see an old map of a dense, chaotic slum area. And on the right, a modern historical plaque marking that same spot. We've gone from a living, breathing, suffering place to a piece of curated history, a neat, clean little reminder of a world that we intentionally erased.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty unsettling thought, doesn't it? Tearing down the slums didn't get rid of the conditions that created the crawlers. The problem didn't vanish, it just moved. Which really makes you wonder, have the slums of our great cities truly disappeared, or have they just changed their address?